Aloha, I'm Eva Andrade. I'm the president and CEO of Hawaii Family Forum. And on today's episode of Faith and Politics, we're going to go from New York to California to talk about some great court decisions that benefit the faith-based community. We're going to talk about a court case happening right here in Hawaii. And then, of course, we'll give you an update on what's happening across the nation in regards to the election. So let's chat about that. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We're sitting in our very different studios today. Jim is in his private studio, and I'm in my private studio. And of course, I'd like to welcome back my co-host and local attorney who gives us his wisdom, and Mana'o. Welcome back, Jim.
Good morning and Merry Christmas. I got my Christmas shirt on.
Oh, good. That's good. People can really get in. So, Jim, you and I talked, and we're going to do something a little different for this show today. We are going to be talking about two different court cases, right? We're going to talk about what happened in New York. We're going to talk about what happened in California. And then we're going to jump and talk about what's happening right here in Hawaii with a court case that you're very familiar with. And then we'll, of course, do our breaks in between, and then we'll jump back in to talk about the craziness that continues to happen across the nation in regards to the election. So before we jump in, any thoughts about what's been happening over the last few days?
You know, it's very interesting to me, but other people in the national news are starting to talk about what you and I have been talking about all month, which is the level of courage that the legislators across the country really have to exercise in order for the constitutional provisions of our election to be upheld. You and I have been talking about that for weeks and weeks.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this is sometimes when I'm watching it, and as we mentioned on the show last week, I'm ODing on all of these things that are happening, all these different news sources, because I really want to know what everybody's talking about. And one of the things we're going to do today, so listeners, make sure you stick around for after the half point break, because I'm going to give Jim Hochberg 10 to 12 minutes or so to talk about the things that he's been wanting to talk about every single week, and we never have time to do it. So there's going to be a Jim Hochberg on the hot spot. So you want to make sure that you're here for after the first break. So Jim, let's.
And you think that's a sales pitch?
Sales pitch, and because I want to see Jim Hochberg on the hot seat. This is important to people, Jim. You know this. You know people are lining up to hear a way that we can get Jim Hochberg on the hot seat.
Okay.
Okay. And for those of you that are listening and not watching, Jim just rolled his eyes. So this is already going to be an interesting show.
I'm a professional eye roller.
A professional eye roller. Okay, so let's start, Jim, with New York. Let's start with the bookend on that side of the nation. So, and we're going to be talking about the lockdowns and the craziness that some of the governors have done in regards to the lockdown. And I know that in New York, basically the governor, he did all these color zones, and the churches were in the color zone that made them almost impossible for them to conduct church services. So you want to bring us up to speed on what was happening in New York?
As you know, we've got to have context to understand the content. And the context of the New York case that you've asked about and the California case has a predecessor also in California from this summer challenging COVID stuff. And it was the South Bay Pentecostal Church that asked the court in California in the summertime to rule as unconstitutional the way Governor Newsom was treating places of worship. And he refused to issue an injunction while the case was going on, not Newsom, but the judge. And so the lawyers appealed that decision at the beginning of the case. Mm-hmm. Usually you appeal everything when the case is over. But there are instances where at the beginning of the case, if an order is entered that that needs to be reviewed before the case goes forward, and temporary restraining orders are usually those kind of rulings. So it was denied. It went up on appeal. It went to the Supreme Court. And this was when Justice Ginsburg was still on the court. And Justice Roberts joined Ginsburg and the other liberals to create a 5-person majority against 4 conservative minorities. So the ruling was by the liberals, and they denied to review the temporary restraining order denial that was up on appeal. That was a 5-4 decision. So that's the context, and it happens kind of frequently. In fact, Ted Cruz has written a book that I'm reading right now, which I would recommend. One Vote Away, How a Single Supreme Court Justice Can Change History. I highly recommend this book. It was published earlier in 2020, and it doesn't cover COVID cases, but it's apt. It's very apt. So in the South Bay case, Justice Roberts said he didn't think federal judges who are unelected, they get nominated and confirmed by the federal government for life, they're not a political body, that they should not second guess elected political people in the states who are dealing with the medical issues of COVID. So he was the only one that expressed that view. The other 4 liberals had other reasons, and his opinion said that. So I happen to have had a case here dealing with COVID restrictions, and my federal judge followed Roberts and said, I'm not going to get in the middle of it. So fast forward to September, Ginsburg dies, Amy Coney Barrett gets put on the court. Now there's a different 5-4 on the same question in different churches on the other side of the country. That's the context. And you and I have been talking for the whole month about why the political solution to the presidential election is way better than relying on the courts. And as we've said, it's because you don't know what they're going to do. The political stuff is the way it's supposed to happen. So anyway, so in New York, there was this big, I think 7,000 persons in attendance, either wedding or funeral in an Orthodox Jewish community that very much upset Governor Cuomo a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago or 2. Anyway, so the plaintiff, which actually happens to be a synagogue and also happens to be the Catholic diocese, challenged the governor's restrictions on churches because they were more strict and more restrained than similar kinds of restrictions on other places where people go to congregate, like shopping malls, restaurants, strip clubs, whatever. And they argue that the governor was taking out on them his anger at that Orthodox, whatever, I forget whatever the reason for the gathering was, when they had nothing to do with it. And they've been following the masking and the social distancing and the sanitation and all that stuff. So they asked for a restraining order. It was also denied. They appealed it. It went up to the Supreme Court. And with Amy Coney Barrett there, the answer was the opposite than it was when Ginsburg was there. And now, by a 5-4 margin, the conservatives said, well, we're going to go ahead and grant the TRO because you're probably going to win on the merits at the end of the case, which is one of the factors you have to convince them of to get it. But it's just a 5-4. One human being is changing the course of history for those churches and synagogues and places of worship. So now the governor's not allowed to treat them differently than the other places in his little color-coded scheme of restricting. And so they're able to do the same things as people at, Costco or whatever. And one of the big restrictions that was different was the number of people they could have present, regardless of the size of the floor. So restaurants have a percentage occupancy restriction. 10 people or 25 people were the limits on places of worship, regardless of how many they actually could hold, what percentage of their usual grouping that might be. So then California, in another different church case, has also asked the Supreme Court to review a COVID restriction on worship attendance. So it's now back in California against Newsom with a different church. And the Supreme Court with Amy Coney Barrett has said, yep, we'll look at that one too. And basically what they're saying is, no matter how bad COVID is, it doesn't replace the Constitution.
Yeah, it's really good because I know that the bishop in Brooklyn, after the New York decision, they issue a statement, as most of the churches do after these court cases when they win. He said, and I quote, "I have said from the beginning the restrictions imposed by Governor Cuomo were an overreach that did not take into account the size of our churches or the safety protocols that have kept parishioners safe." So I want to get your thoughts because, I mean, obviously there was an animus that was directed towards the churches, but the churches, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but did the churches not go above and beyond to do everything they could to make sure that they were following all of the guidelines, the mask wearing, the distance, all of that stuff? They really were trying to follow the rules as best they could, correct?
Well, that's what they say in their case. Yes. So you assume it's true, but you say things that in your complaint, and then you have to prove them with evidence in the second part of the case they haven't gotten to yet. And that's where the cross-examination will happen, and the specific details of, did they keep a log, blah, 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 blah. But here's what's interesting, and I think what's really the most important thing about this Supreme Court ruling, because what they actually said, what the majority of the conservatives on the court, which includes Amy Coney Barrett now, they said, if the New York restrictions are enforced, they will result in permanent harm to people who cannot attend and for whom a live stream of service is not an adequate substitute. So now we have a Supreme Court that values what worship is to people.
That's good.
It's not just a bunch of religious nuts in a building over there and we don't care about them. Now, by one change justice, the Supreme Court understands by a majority of 5-4 why we go to worship service.
That's really, really good. This is really, really good. And so when you're looking now at the decisions that was made for both the New York church and the California church, this really does benefit everybody, right? I mean, I know that a lot of people say what happens in New York, what happens in California, what happens in Texas or whatever, but this, when the Supreme Court gets involved and makes a decision like this, we should all rejoice, right?
Well, correct. Yes. And this is the season for rejoicing. I got my Christmas shirt.
It is. We're trying to find joy in all things. And you notice we haven't talked about the E word yet, which is good, right? Because we're focusing on some other positive things that have happened. So, in this last few minutes that we have, Jim, I guess with all the decisions that the Supreme Court is going to possibly be making moving forward because of the shift that you're talking about, what can the faith-based community begin to look forward to with some of the cases that could potentially be coming up regarding the faith-based community?
So it's kind of interesting. Quite a while back, there was a couple of Muslim guys who were put on the no-fly list. And you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with anything? But it really does.
And good. So listeners, stay tuned because you need to know too why Jim is going there. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, so they were put on the no-fly list, according to them, because they refused to become spies against their Muslim community for the FBI.
Okay.
And therefore, they couldn't board a plane. And it was unconstitutional for the FBI to do that based on their religion, because they're Muslims. And it's based on their religion because if they weren't Muslims, the FBI wouldn't be asking them to spy on the Muslim community. They have to be part of the community to be of interest, right? So they have a pending suit that the Supreme Court is going to look at, asking whether when government agents infringe on your constitutional rights, this one's religious liberty, can you sue them personally for money damages? There was a case in the 60s where it's Bivens versus 6 agents. Guy named Bivens claimed that his civil rights were violated by 6 FBI agents or police agents. I don't remember what organization, but government police authorities. And usually you sue the government for an order that they either do something or they stop doing something. You don't usually sue the government for money, for damage, unless it's like a tort where a government airplane hits your house and blows it up. But for infringements of rights, you can get what's called injunctive relief, not damages. This case is following on the Bivens case, where they were allowed to sue the 6 unnamed agents in their individual capacity for money damages because of how bad what they did was to the guy Bivens. Hardly ever happens. It was such a bad set of facts, like they say, bad facts make bad law. Well, these Muslim guys are raising that with respect to their religious liberty, where they weren't tortured and they weren't physically abused. They were just put on a no-fly list, couldn't get on an airplane. And if the Supreme Court allows them to get damages for that, then churches would probably be able to ask for damages against Cuomo personally for infringing on their right to exercise of religion by attending worship services. So that's kind of an interesting thing I'm watching. It probably doesn't mean a whole lot to the viewers, but it's very interesting to see what happens.
Well, so in the last 30 seconds before we go into our next break, tell us why the faith-based community should care about what's happening in another state, and whether the Supreme Court weighs in on something or not. Why do we need to care?
Okay, so the faith-based community is very familiar with Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton, which said every state must allow abortion within the parameters of that 1973 opinion. So we all know the Supreme Court can order that every state do something or stop doing something. So it would matter to everybody. But you know what's more important than caring what the Supreme Court does? It's voting, because the Supreme Court justices are appointed by people that got elected. And if we aren't voting for the right people, we're not going to get the right judges.
Well, good. So make sure, listeners, that you stay tuned for the second half of our show. That'll be coming up in about 15 or so minutes, because we are going to talk about the election. But after the break, we're going to come back and we're going to share with you some of the craziness that's happening in Hawaii because of lawsuits against the church. So stay tuned and we'll see you in a bit.
We have a mission here at KALO TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my gosh.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Aloha, I'm Eva Andrade. I'm the president of Hawaii Family Forum, and we've been serving Hawaii's faith-based community since 1998. What we do is we provide research and education to the faith-based community to help them understand what's happening at the state capitol and what's happening on the issues that affect the families here in Hawaii. If you would like more information, please visit us on the web. But in the meantime, know that Micah 6:8 says that the Lord requires of us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And we can help you do that, not only to raise your voice the way that the Lord calls us to raise our voice, but to understand the issues on a scriptural basis. And we'll tell you how you can learn more about what's affecting Hawaii's families. Mahalo. Welcome back. I hope that you're at least beginning to get a little bit excited that in spite of all the craziness that has happened this year, we've had some good things come out of the Supreme Court. And if you watch our prior Faith and Politics show, we talked with Brittany Jones from our Family Policy Alliance in Kansas, who gave us some good news on the Supreme Court decisions at the beginning of the year and at the middle of the year. So there have been some good Supreme Court cases that benefited the faith-based community this year, and we're yet to see some good things. So thanks for hanging in there. But now let's turn our eyes towards Hawaii, because obviously our listeners here in Hawaii want to know how all of this craziness affects us. Does it affect us? Is there discrimination to people of faith in these beautiful islands of Hawaii? And so Jim, why don't you talk to us about the court case that you've personally been involved in? Some people may know about it, some people may not. So why don't you build a little bit of a background for us so we know what's going on?
I bet some people that used to know about it completely forgot because it started so long ago. So in 2013, Mitch Kale and Holly Huber, his girlfriend, they've been together forever, but they never got married because they're atheists. They were living in Hawaii. You and I did a lot of traveling road shows in churches. We continue to do. We do it now if people want us to, but I think it might have to be on Zoom or something dumb. But Mitch Kale and Holly Huber are atheists. They're very politically active atheists. He's caused all kinds of trouble in Hawaii over the years with, McKinley High School, with the police department oath, with just all kinds of things. And one of the things he did is he, in his deposition, actually, he told us the story this way. He and Holly go on a lot of walks for exercise, and they walked past Farrington High School one day in 2013 or 2012, and they noticed the New Hope tent stuff up for the whole weekend as they walked by, several different times during the weekend. And not liking churches, because he's not just a peaceful atheist, he's an activist atheist, he decided to look into how it is that New Hope could be having these tents and everything on the campus there. Were they paying? Was it free? What was the deal? He had no idea.
Jim,
so
before you continue, because I know this is all important what you're talking about, but just in case people don't know who Mitch Kale is, he's the guy that single-handedly took the cross down from, was it Koli Pass? Where was it? The cross that he took down?
I think it was Koli Pass.
Yeah. So if you all remember, that happened a long time ago. The same kind of thing that Jim is describing right now, it drove him absolutely crazy that he would see that cross up, and it bothered him. And so he started that suit. He also went after a Catholic church on the leeward side for the same reason, because he could see the cross from the freeway. So this is kind of his MO. This is what he does. He walks around, he sees something he doesn't like, and then he sues. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
No, that's okay. And that's what he does. And what we do impacts what he does, because when we vote for people that cave into him, he gets encouraged to do more. If we would vote for people that respect and protect religious liberty, he'd move somewhere else, which, by the way, he has now. But we got to vote for the right people. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but on that point, it can't be said often enough. So anyway, having noticed that New Hope was at Farrington High School in a large outdoor way, he asked Freedom of Information requests to the Department of Education for churches using schools. And he was surprised to find out that all the schools in the state, public schools, give access to the facilities to churches on the weekends. And he came to learn that state law actually says that public school facilities shall be made available to the general public during non-instructional times. That's the law. It's been the law since before I started practicing law in 1984.
And churches have been using the school property for a long time here in Hawaii, right?
Every school is used by one or more churches. I've trained my dogs with a doggy training company in the field at schools, and she has to reserve that. The Boy Scouts use rooms for their meetings. AA groups meet in schools. So because that's the law, the principals rent the parts of the facility that the renter wants to use, and they pay. Or sometimes the churches would be exempted from a lease rent payment because they were going to invest big bucks into upgrading the theater with air conditioning, new seats, lighting, whatever, stage lighting, or painting the school or whatever. So the principals were allowed to make these deals.
Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of improvements, upgrades, and maintenance were paid by these churches. That's what you're saying.
Well, yeah. And so Mitch and Holly presented their findings to the DOE in 2012, hoping that they were going to change their policy because Mitch and Holly didn't think churches should be taking advantage of government stuff because they're separation of state and church people, right?
Yep.
Well, the DOE wasn't all that interested because if you think about it, school principals were able to rake in spare money from rental to people paying cash. And it didn't go back to the general fund. It was actually available for the principal to spend at the school. So principals liked it. So the DOE didn't care. Well, that really frustrated Mitch and Holly. So they went and talked to a lawyer who told them, well, we could actually sue under a whistleblower statute. And so that's what they did. Now, what's a whistleblower statute? So whistleblower statutes got started in Congress decades ago when the toilet seats in the Pentagon cost $5,000 and hammers for government people cost $500 when you could get the same toilet seat, the same hammer at Home Depot for whatever, $100, $10. So they created the False Claims Act federally, which says if you have personal independent knowledge of false claims being made to the government, so a company makes a contract with the government to provide the toilet seats that are supposed to be X, but they get paid Y, and it's a false claim made for the payment, and you turn them in under this statute, you get a percentage of what the government recovers from them as the false claim gets changed to a non-false claim. But you always have to have independent knowledge, and you have to be the original source of the knowledge. So it's for insiders. It's a whistleblower working in the office, turning people in. So Mitch, Kale, and Holly Huber used that state law because Hawaii made one, states made them too. It's a good idea. You want to keep your government from getting ripped off. You create a mechanism to catch them and punish them. You facilitate and encourage the insiders to blow the whistle because they get money for it. It's not a bad thing.
So do you think, based on what you said in the description you gave, and I know that you have an opinion about this, do you think that Mitch and Holly fall into the category of whistleblower then, based on your description?
Okay, so what happens when a case gets filed is the defendant responds within the first 20 days. And they can respond either by answering the allegations and making counterclaims, or in lieu of that, if they don't think there's really a case, they can file a motion to dismiss the case because they haven't stated a claim they can get relief from the court for. In this case, Mitch filed his lawsuit in 2013, asking for the court to review all of 7 churches' uses of the particular schools going back 6 years, because the statute that gives this claim has a 6-year statute of limitations. You can't go back farther than 6 years. So they went back to 2006 or 2007. And they had 500 something claims 7 churches, every weekend, special holidays, all this stuff. And so I represent One Love Ministries and Calvary Chapel Central Oahu, which are 2 Calvary Chapel churches. There were some 5 Foursquare churches that were represented by a lawyer appointed by an insurance company. I'm doing the case with Alliance Defending Freedom, and we're not charging. We're doing it pro bono. And the insurance company was paying the law firm that was defending the New Hopes. So what happened is the New Hopes settled. They never even filed any response to the lawsuit. They negotiated a settlement right away. And on behalf of our 2 clients, we filed a motion to dismiss because they can't bring this claim. It's a question of whether they have standing or not. So are they the people that the statute expected to be making the claim, or are they just trying to get the money if they can squeeze it out?
Okay, so when you talk about a settlement, does that mean that Mitch Kale got money from New?
Well, it's interesting because if you remember back to 2013, or maybe it was in early 2014, probably 2013. I don't remember the month the complaint was filed, but the news reported that there was a settlement and Mitch Kale got a bunch of money. I didn't see the deal that the New Hope churches worked out with Mitch and Holly because it was a secret settlement, but I did see the order that got entered in the case. And the order said all the money went to the DOE, 100% of the payment. So I don't think Mitch and Holly got any money. Could that have been fake news? I don't know if we had fake news before Trump, but we probably did. But anyway, so
fact checkers.
So we filed a motion to dismiss because we said that they didn't state a claim under that statute that they could recover under. And the court granted our motion, but gave them the opportunity to amend the complaint to try again. So they amended the complaint to try again. We filed another motion to dismiss. The judge initially ruled, and there's a tricky little twist. In 2012, the state legislature amended the law on the question of standing. So for the case, on July 9th, 2012, the rule changed. So we had to argue 2 different rules. From July 8th, 2012 back to 2007, the rule was if you don't have standing, you don't get to bring the case. From July 9th to the day the case was filed, 2012, till the case was filed in 2013, it wasn't a jurisdictional question. It's an affirmative defense, which means they get to bring the case, they get to make their claims, and we argue in defense of ourselves that they don't qualify as the original source inside whistleblower.
Okay, so you've got about 30 seconds left. Tell us where we are with the case right now.
Okay, so we lost the motion to dismiss. We appealed it. We won the appeal. We went back. We took their depositions. We filed a motion to dismiss. That got heard last week. And we're going to see in June of next year what the judge does with it because she's been assigned to another court for 6 months.
Wow. So it's like the case that never ends. So you may be working on
cases are like that. If you don't settle your case, you could be in for more than 10 years easy.
All right. So stay tuned, listeners. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to put Jim Hochberg on the hot seat. So we'll see you back in a couple of minutes.
It's no secret that KALO TV is the only local Christian TV station reaching the islands of Hawaii with 24/7 Christ-centered content. Just how important is KALO TV to our culture?
Think about it. This year has been unprecedented. The pandemic lockdown, churches closed, religious freedom, a nation divided, cultural unrest. If there's ever a time that we need Christ-centered content, it is now.
Our community is struggling. Depression, suicide, unemployment, lack of purpose. Many of us are without hope. In fact, some of us are considered non-essential.
Non-essential? That's absurd. In fact, there's never been a more crucial time that the church is essential. We have the hope of Christ, the answer for our time.
And KALO TV is committed to broadcasting the good news across Hawaii.
And that's why we're reaching out even more to those in need of God's love. Here's how.
We're starting a new initiative called KALO Outreach, where we're going into our local communities and becoming the hands and feet of Christ.
We continue to create new and original programs that will reach every generation with the hope of Jesus.
We are adding new local and international programs to KALO TV. After all, it is our intention to be a bright light to Hawaii and beyond.
Look, it hasn't been easy for any of us. In fact, if you need prayer, we are here for you.
And if you need encouragement, please tune in, whether it's on air, online, or on social platforms. Our vision is to provide uplifting content.
Would you join us as we broadcast the good news? This is our opportunity to come together as a community.
Right now is a pivotal time to invest in Hawaii. First and foremost, let's pray together for Hawaii. And for those who are able to, here are some ways that you can give.
As we are that the sun will set tonight and rise again tomorrow morning, so is our hope in Christ.
KALO TV, the Aloha Station, broadcasting Aloha 24/7.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed your break. We, as always, would like to thank KALO TV for all their work to make these episodes possible. And K-Light Radio, we miss you, we love you, and we're looking forward to being back in the studio after the Christmas holidays. Jim's going to New York to visit family, so he won't be here for the next couple of weeks. So my co-host may change, which is all good. It'll keep some new life and some new blood in there. So Jim, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. So right now, I know that you have very strong opinions about.
No,
people are going to find that really hard to believe. But when it comes to the election and all the crazy stuff that's happening, there's the court side of things, and then there's the political side of things. And you are really passionate about the political side of things, in spite of the fact that the court side of it has gotten a lot of attention, depending on what news source you're watching. So let's talk about the political side of it. And let's do this first by looking at some of the deadlines. All right. So everybody kept hearing about safe harbor, which was December the 8th. That date has now come and gone. Some of the social media services like YouTube have now issued statements saying that, as of safe harbor date, they're not going to allow certain kinds of programming. There's actually Facebook is going through all kinds of lawsuits right now. So Jim, safe harbor, what does that mean? And shouldn't we stop talking now about all this stuff and let President-elect Biden get to business? He's already been appointing people to positions. All of the court cases that have been filed have all failed. We're just tired of hearing all of this craziness. The conservatives, the whiners, the ones that are not willing to give up this election. They want to hold on to power. Trump he lost the election. Why cannot we move on now that the safe harbor has passed?
The question actually is phrased a little differently. And that is, do the people in the United States, including the leftists and the liberals that think the Republicans and the conservatives should give up, do we all, as Americans together, want to have a country that is governed by the rule of law? And I hope the answer is yes, because that's what separates us from third world countries, where the law is what the strong man says it is, not what the law says it is. And so
it's the court
to put that into the context of your question, the safe harbor is a date that is not in the Constitution, by the way. It's a federal statutory date that says on they don't pick dates. It's on a week, the day of the week of December after the full moon rises over the Indian nations of, I don't know. It's not a day on the calendar. It's the first, like the election, the first Tuesday in November. The date in December for the Electoral College to meet, to be selected, is the first Tuesday after the second Monday, something weird like that. Okay. So anyway, that presumes that by that day, a valid legal election occurred that was tallied legally, that resulted in the selection of electors that can do something on the 8th of December this year. And under the rule of law, it's very important that the events that are the foundation for the selection of the electors by the 8th of December this year, that it was legal. So that's why I say if you want to live in America under the rule of law, the 8th of December isn't as important as what happened underneath it that the electors are standing on. And that's why we're talking about, was this election a valid legal election, like some people say, or was it a massively fraudulent election, which other people say? And that question needs to be answered. So the December 8th date is not as meaningful as what happened that leads up to that date. And the Supreme Court of the United States has the authority to rule that under the Constitution, around January 20th of the year after the presidential election is the inauguration date. That's the only day in the Constitution. So the United States Supreme Court, on the legal side of things, can evaluate what's going on with the selection of the electors date in December, the voting on the 14th of December by the electors, the counting of the ballots January by the new Congress. None of that's in the Constitution. So if the election is fraudulent, the Supreme Court could eliminate those deadlines, which is what part of all this litigation is.
Okay, but there's half of the country, right, that believe that it was a fair election. And then there are a lot of people across the nation that are saying, look, I got a mail-in ballot. So, if we're jumping to some of the states that are in these litigation states, there are people that received their ballot in the mail, whether they were asked for it or not, and they voted, and they did everything they thought was right based on what their government officials were telling them. So why should their vote be disenfranchised because of speculation out there that these votes have been, cast by illegal people or dead people or from a different state or that systems change it? I mean, why disenfranchise people who voted what they believe was the right way?
So my take on that is, if you're not able in any state to separate out lawful votes from unlawful votes, counting any unlawful votes disenfranchises the lawful voters. So if they got rid of the envelopes, if they didn't check the signatures, if they did these things in the process of the voting regime, and they can't now distinguish lawful from unlawful votes, what can you do? And you're right, the person that did what the government told them to do and voted, they get disenfranchised, but so does everybody that voted legally in person, so does everybody that voted legally, however they voted legally. And so the question really is different than the one you're asking. And there's a political response, which is the better response in my view, which I've been saying on this show the whole month of November and now into December, rather than the litigation response, because we've been as a community, as a nation of people, trained to expect that we want our political decisions made by the courts, either to change something that we feel has been unconstitutionally restrictive, or to protect us from a proposed change that we think is going to be unconstitutional. And I'm going to go back to the voting word. We should be voting for people that are going to take those things into consideration when they pass the laws that we have to litigate about. Voting is critically important, and we have to vote based on the values we want our candidates to be working under, not because they got a good smile, they got an attractive wife, they went to high school with us. None of that stuff matters. We don't need to use the courts to solve political problems. It's the worst choice.
That's why I think that's why there's so much unrest right now, is that everybody, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you have questions now, right? You have questions about the way that this state does business, or the way that state does business, or the way this governor is making decisions, or the way that this secretary of state is making decisions. Or, I mean, it's so crazy now, regardless of who you're talking to, people are asking questions like, why does it work this way? And it's very important what you're saying, because for us to understand what's happening in our states, it begins with who are those people that are in those positions that are making these decisions. So it goes back to what you're saying. That's why it's so important that we need to vote. So all of the litigation, that is one way, right, that this whole election could turn out. But going back to the political side of this, the state legislators in these states answering the question that you just had, right? We cannot verify votes now. We know that some people voted properly. We know that some people didn't. We know that there's some question. Okay, so we're not taking a position on whether it was Dominion machines or whether it was dead people voting or people living outside. We're not saying that. We're just saying that there are questions, right? There are questions in the election, in the process, that have people, half of the country, beginning to doubt. So state legislators have been given the right, the framers of our Constitution, way back when, before cell phones and before internet and all this stuff, they saw that there was a potential for problems to take place. And so they gave the power to the state legislators. So why, Jim Hochberg, are a lot of these state legislators, and some of them are Republican, they're not standing up to this? They're not asking the questions that you're saying needs to be asked. I mean, could that mean that they think that there is nothing to see here, move on? Or is it that you think that they're not courageous enough? I mean, why do you think that some of these legislators have not risen to the challenge?
So to answer the question, we got to put it in the context of the history of the presidential elections in this country. In 1789, the Continental Congress passed the Constitution of the United States and the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. In that original document, there was a much bigger concern between the relationship between the states and the federal government than we think today. After FDR, the federal government just became this bigger and bigger and bigger monolithic part of our lives, and now we just assume it's a good thing to have a big federal government. In 1789, the anti-federalists didn't want a very big federal government, and the federalists did, and they compromised by splitting up the authority politically between different kinds of groups of things. You would vote for your members of the House every 2 years. The people would vote for the congressional House members. At the beginning of our country, up until Woodrow Wilson around the First World War, the state legislatures voted for the congressional senators. So the House members represented the people, and the Senate members represented the states, and therefore Congress wasn't going to pass any laws that were harmful to either the people or the state government. Today, we have a word, unfunded mandates. That's because the states are not represented in the Congress. They would never have had any unfunded mandate put on a state if the senators were voting on bills because they represented state legislatures. Well, that changed at the First World War. But also at the beginning of the country, the ballots never had president and vice president name on it. You didn't vote for them. You never did. You would vote for your governor, your congressman. The state legislatures picked electors. The electors met in the Electoral College, and the Electoral College voted for the president and the vice president.
Okay, so this was such a good session, but it was so short, and we're running out of time. So what happens? So in the last minute that we have, Jim, what happens if inaugural day comes and there is no decision made on the president when it comes to the 12th Amendment? Does that mean that the vice president elect would become the president if there's no decision, or would that be Speaker of the House?
Well, it's interesting. The state legislatures still have the constitutional power to pick electors. They don't have to go with the vote. They can pick electors if they have courage, pick Trump electors. If Trump gets more than 269 electoral votes, he gets reelected. They may not. Some are exhibiting that courage, some are not. If neither guy gets 270 electoral votes, then the Congress actually votes for the president. The Senate votes for the vice president, one vote per state. If there is nobody inaugurated, it's interesting. If the president dies, the vice president is inaugurated. I'm not sure if there's no inauguration, because that's a constitutional deadline. I'm not sure how they would deal with that. I don't know. I'm going to have to think a little bit more about that.
Well, good. So as we go into the next break, we're going to build a little bit more on what Jim said earlier about feeling like votes. If you're voting one way and you believe you're voting right, but you feel your vote is being disenfranchised by another group, which is exactly how the state of Texas feels about this election. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the state of Texas and what their lawsuit is all about, and the 17, I believe, other states that have joined that lawsuit. So we'll see you back in a few minutes.
We have a mission here at KALO TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my God.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back. In this last few minutes, we're going to be talking about the Texas lawsuit and what that means in the big pot of stew of litigation that has happened over the last, since the election. And we actually are in a very historic time right now, because as crazy as the times are right now, we have never seen the level of polarization that we're seeing right now, as far as between news stations, between political parties, between families, between businesses and government, and with all of the craziness on the lockdowns. We are definitely 2020. It's almost like, to me, the year that never was. It's like I woke up at the beginning of 2020, and I'm going to wake up in the beginning of 2021 with a president being sworn in, and I'm going to wonder what happened during 2020, because it's just, this year has been absolutely insane. So Jim, in these last few minutes that we have, the state of Texas filed a lawsuit and really changed the game. They really did. I mean, there's a lot of lawsuits, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the different states, but what happened in Texas, and then all of the other states that have jumped on with amicus briefs, this is different. We're a new wind is blowing. You want to share with everybody what's happening?
Okay, so The campaign, presidential campaign, has filed suits. People outside the campaign have filed suits represented by Sidney Powell or Lynn Wood or other people. And they are attacking the way that the election was conducted in the states that they're suing. So now the state of Texas has said, you know what, we're providing members of the Electoral College, and we don't like the way these other states are gathering the votes to create their members of the to pick their members of the Electoral College. So we're going to sue them in court, state to state. One state is permitted to sue another state under our U.S. Constitution. And interestingly enough, and it kind of makes sense, you wouldn't sue a state in state court. Because if Hawaii sued California in Hawaii, there's a inherent bias that probably Hawaii is going to rule for Hawaii. So you have to sue in federal court. But because state suing states is such a extreme event, you don't sue in the regular trial court. You start your case at the U.S. Supreme Court. Wow. They are the trial court. Like we saw the Chief Justice in the impeachment trial, this would be not in the Congress, it would be in the Supreme Court. They would have witnesses, they would have cross-examination, they would have whatever the trial would be. So that's what Texas is asking. So we know there's a procedure for Texas to sue these other states at the U.S. Supreme Court. But you have to have a procedure, and you also have to have a cognizable claim. That is a claim that the court can resolve. All of this litigation stuff should provide the evidence that the state legislatures need to disregard the vote and pick electors by their own power that they have in the Constitution.
Okay, well, let's stay connected. We've run out of time for the show today. Next week, we've got some great people that are going to be participating. We've got Kahu Wendell Davis that's going to be doing a Christmas show with us. We're going to be talking to Glenn Stanton, a Focus on the Family. We're trying to get some of our counterparts maybe in Texas to talk about what's happening there. And Jim's going to be on vacation, so he may be able to call in, so we may be able to get to hear his voice. So once again, thank you to KALO TV for their partnership to make this happen. If you want more of these shows, then please partner with KALO TV. You can go to kalotv.com and make contact with them and partner with us to make this show happen. And as always, if you've got a comment and you want us to talk about it on the show, email me at eva@kalotv.com. And we will see you all next time. Mahalo, everybody.